Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 50 years ago, Congress passed the Fair Housing Act, but housing discrimination is still a huge problem in this country. According to a recent study, minority borrowers were more likely to be denied a mortgage than similar white borrowers in 61 cities across this country. Now, HUD is responsible for combating housing discrimination, and during your confirmation process, I asked you about your commitment to enforcing laws against housing discrimination, despite whatever personal feelings you had about those laws. And you said at that hearing, quote, "I will follow the law." And I remember hoping that that was true. So, Secretary Carson, it's been a year now. Can you name a few of the things you've done to reduce housing discrimination in your time at HUD?
First of all, we are constantly involved in lawsuits that we have brought against people for housing discrimination.
So are you saying you've initiated many lawsuits over the past year? Is that on discrimination issues? Is that what you're saying?
That is an ongoing process.
So you have initiated how many lawsuits over the last year?
I can't tell you how many. We can certainly get someone to follow up with you on that.
Okay, anything more?
I think that's obviously very important. The way I kind of look at it is when I talk about fair.
I'm sorry, I'm not asking you to get into your description of it. I just want to know what you've done to reduce, the specific things you've done to help reduce housing discrimination. And you've said you've initiated many lawsuits, and you'll get back to me on the exact number. And I just want to know other specific things you have done. Anything more?
Well, I would simply say that what we do is to try to create a fair environment for all people and all of our policies. So when we create a fair environment for everybody, that means minorities as well.
That's the question I'm asking, though, is dealing specifically with discrimination, which is the problem. Mr. Secretary, I wanted to give you a chance to make your case, because when I look at your track record at HUD, I just see you headed in the wrong direction, that is going backwards. And I want to give you one example. The Fair Housing Act directed HUD to, quote, affirmatively further fair housing. That is the law. And in 2015, HUD implemented that mandate by issuing a rule that required communities that ask for block grants from HUD to analyze obstacles that minority residents face and to propose plans to address them. Civil rights groups and housing advocates at the time said the rule would be an important tool for reducing segregation and discrimination. Then you took over, and you delayed the effective date of that rule until at least 2020. You even said that HUD wouldn't even review whatever information cities had about discrimination that they had already submitted to HUD. So, Secretary Carson, do you think that delaying the 2015 HUD rule for several more years has helped reduce housing discrimination?
I hope you'll give me an opportunity to answer that question.
Well, I hope you will answer it.
Okay. First of all, we were petitioned by dozens and dozens of cities and municipalities to, in fact, delay it because it costs between $100,000 and $800,000 to follow the regulations that were put in place, and they had to hire 2 or 3 people. This is great if you have a lot of money. It's not.
Excuse me, Secretary Carson, let me just remind you, this is a question about following the law. The law clearly says affirmatively further fair housing. It doesn't say cut back on that because you're concerned about compliance costs. And I have to say, I am very concerned that you pick compliance costs as your answer when how you previously described your real concern as, quote, that this was a failed socialist experiment to try to reduce discrimination. Let me ask you about another example. The Obama administration had issued a rule on housing vouchers that made a critical change in how the value of a housing voucher was calculated. It was called the Small Area Fair Rent Rule. The Obama administration had collected mountains of data showing that changing the calculation would reduce segregation in metro areas. But when you took over, you tried to delay the effective date of the rule for another 2 years. So did you think that delaying the effective date of this rule would reduce housing discrimination?
Well, first of all, we didn't delay it.
You tried.
Let me tell you what we did. We said those municipalities that are not ready to implement it, because we had multiple people call us, said we can't do this, we said you have another year to get ready. For the ones who were ready to do it, we said you can do it right now or any time up until that year. So we did not delay it. That was a mischaracterization.
You know, I'm sorry, the reports were that you tried to delay it and got into some trouble.
Those were the reports.
You know,
that's not the facts.
Mr. Secretary, a lot of people are criticizing you for spending tens of thousands of dollars in taxpayer money on fancy furniture. And don't get me wrong, I think scamming the taxpayers is a scandal. But the biggest scandal of your tenure is your unwillingness to do your job and enforce the laws that reduce housing discrimination and segregation across this country. Decades of housing discrimination have helped create an enormous wealth gap between white and black families, and the gap between white homeownership rates and black homeownership rates is 30 percentage points larger than it was back in 1968. In 1968, the typical black family had 1/6 as much wealth as the typical white family. Now it is 1/10. We have gone backwards since the civil rights era. It is HUD's job to help end housing discrimination. That's what the law said. You said you would enforce these laws. You haven't, and I think that's the scandal that should get you fired.
Well, I don't think that you have characterized things in any way close to what is accurate, but you're welcome to say whatever you want.
No, I really resent that remark. I have asked the question about how it is that delaying enforcement of rules that were already in place to help end housing discrimination would help. I ask you to make your case, and all you can say is compliance costs were high. No. That does not explain how it is that you were going to delay enforcement of those rules, and that was going to help end housing discrimination.
I think I explained it to you quite well, that with the small area fair markets, that we did not tell people that they couldn't do it.
I would not describe
we tell them that they could
well.
go ahead with that immediately. There's no delay if you're ready to do it.
You won't even look at the data that's come into HUD. That's not a commitment to ending housing discrimination.
Senator Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Mr. Secretary. Glad you're here. 5,200 Ohioans died from drug overdoses in the 12 months measured by the most recent CDC report, a 36% increase from August to August, what we have. That number probably understates the deaths. You apparently hired a 24-year-old campaign worker with no relevant experience to work on this issue at HUD. Is that true?
There was someone who was hired. I generally don't get involved with lower level.
Okay, so you don't get involved in tables selection. Your wife does, even though she's not a federal employee. You don't get involved in ethics issues.
If you're going to be throwing out these kind of charges, you should give me an opportunity to answer them.
I will after I'm finished with the last question. Last June, you hired a chief information officer, Johnson Joy, who resigned this week. Why did you choose him, and why did he resign after only 9 months on the job?
He had a tremendous amount of experience in technological advancement, and we needed to make a very significant transformation. I lost confidence in his ability to lead.
Mr. Joy apparently used a contractor to hire a friend, Navid Jaffrey, who wildly exaggerated his resume. Do you think it'd be better to advertise and compete for these jobs rather than hiring cronies through a subcontractor in the future as you move forward?
I do not hire cronies and subcontractors.
Well,
I don't do that.
HUD seems to under your leadership. Why did Mr. Jaffrey and Mr. Joy leave only this week after this story hit the media? Is that the first you knew about it?
As soon as I found out about the problems, we dealt with them.
Does it bother you that you don't know these things are going on in your agency until the media write about them?
I don't think that that's a fair characterization.
Well, it just was with these two. You just said you found out about it, and these were pretty high-profile political people. You found out about it, and then you fired them.
One was high-profile, one was not. And when we find out about it, we dealt with it.
Yeah. Mr. Secretary, as you remember, I voted to confirm you. 4 other Democrats on this committee voted to confirm you. I'm not sure I made the right decision. Thank you.